At dawn on a windless morning in early 1942, before the tide of war had begun turning in North Africa or the Pacific, a small and largely forgotten Allied operation unfolded along the rugged French coast near Pluha. The shoreline, quiet, gray, and watched by only a handful of German sentries, hid the approach of a wooden motor launch carrying elements of No. 10 Inter-Allied Commando. Their mission was simple on paper: land silently, gather intelligence on coastal defenses, and withdraw before the enemy even knew they were there. Yet what occurred that morning would vanish almost entirely from official logs, swallowed by secrecy and wartime necessity. Only scattered notes and a handful of conflicting testimonies survive, hinting at what may have been one of the earliest unsanctioned Allied reconnaissance landings in occupied France. The challenge from the start was formidable. No. 10 Commando was a unique unit, formed from volunteers who had fled occupied Europe, men who carried not only weapons but personal vendettas and complicated loyalties. The detachment selected for this landing included Belgians, Norwegians, and a pair of Polish operatives familiar with German coastal procedures. Their small craft departed from a British coastal station under heavy clouds, pushing through swells that made quiet movement nearly impossible. Once they neared the shoreline, the commandos transferred into collapsible dinghies, paddling toward a darkened strip of sand beneath towering cliffs. Every few seconds, the creak of an oar or the slap of a wave sounded too loud, a potential trigger for a German searchlight to sweep across the water. Context for this mission remains murky. The fragmentary documents that refer to it appear only in coded references: shoreline assay, preliminary condition assessment, and one file labeled simply Blue Cape, not for retention. These cryptic remarks suggest the landing was never intended for broad circulation, possibly because it was conducted ahead of official authorization or because higher command feared escalation if the team was compromised. A handwritten note, likely from a staff officer at Combined Operations Headquarters, reads, "If exposed, deny knowledge." Such phrasing was rare in British paperwork, yet here it appeared with unmistakable clarity. Once ashore, the commandos split into pairs, navigating the narrow goat paths that snaked upward through the cliffs. They carried only suppressed pistols, Fairbairn Sykes fighting knives, and small demolition charges for contingency withdrawal. Their objective was a cluster of German observation posts believed to be under construction. Using the pre-dawn darkness, the team crept close enough to identify fresh timber crates, recently installed communication lines, and an unusual number of field telephones for what should have been a minor lookout. One commando recorded in his notebook, later recovered, that the Germans appeared to be reinforcing the area more heavily than aerial reconnaissance had suggested. "Too many wires. Too many sleepers. Something not in the brief," he wrote. But the mission began to unravel during the exfiltration phase. According to later testimony from one of the surviving operatives, the team discovered the cliff path blocked by a new wire obstacle that hadn't been present hours earlier. Whether it had been installed overnight or was simply overlooked remains unknown. Forced to detour inland, the small group inadvertently encountered a German patrol moving between outposts. A brief, muffled exchange of gunfire followed, only seconds long, but enough to fracture the coordination of the returning team. What happened next is the heart of the mystery. When the dinghies reached the motor launch, 2 men and entire fire team were missing. The surviving commandos insisted the last sighting of the missing pair was just after the gunfire, retreating through a patch of dense underbrush. No bodies were found. No prisoners were reported by German units in the sector. One British intelligence report drafted weeks later theorized the pair may have attempted to signal for a separate extraction further down the coast. Another memorandum, heavily redacted, hinted they may have witnessed something along the cliffs that London did not want included in standard documentation. Modern historians examining the few surviving fragments note the absence of any after-action report, something almost unheard of for commando operations. That absence alone points to deliberate burial, whether for political, strategic, or diplomatic reasons. The mystery only deepens when comparing testimonies. The Belgian survivor claimed the Germans had begun reinforcing the Pluha cliffs for reasons unknown. The Polish operative insisted the missing men saw unusual crates near the observation post, possibly radar components. Conflicting accounts leave only speculation, not certainty. Whatever the truth, the landing remains one of the least documented commando actions of the early war, a mission concealed by layers of wartime bureaucracy and silence. Even now, archival references taper off exactly where curiosity begins. And as later operations would show, this pattern of secrecy was not an anomaly but the first glimpse of a broader trend. Covert landings undertaken at the edges of Allied strategy, then quietly swept from official memory. The fate of the missing fire team and what they may have discovered on those cliffs remains the unanswered question that pulls researchers deeper into this forgotten episode, setting the stage for the next, even more obscure landing in the Dalmatian shadows of 1942. In the late months of 1942, as the Axis tightened its grip on the Balkans, the Adriatic Sea became an increasingly contested frontier of intelligence gathering. Amid its jagged coastline and thousands of islands, one of the most obscure American operations of the war unfolded, an OSS maritime unit insertion onto the Dalmatian coast. It was a mission executed under a cover so tight that for decades it appeared only as a thin red line on a classified operations map, annotated with the cryptic phrase, MU Delta, unconfirmed return. What happened on those rocky shores remains one of the OSS' most puzzling wartime disappearances. The operation began with a tactical struggle. The maritime unit, the precursor to modern Navy SEALs, was in its infancy. The men selected for the Dalmatian insertion had only months of experience with rebreathers, collapsible boats, and silent shoreline landings. Their orders were precise: land near a small fishing village south of Šibenik, avoid German Kastempolizei patrols, make contact with emerging Yugoslav partisan cells, and determine if rumors of a fortified Axis observation site were true. Yet nothing about the Adriatic cooperated. Dense fog, unpredictable currents, and the sound-amplifying cliffs made covert entry extraordinarily dangerous. Their modified folding kayaks, nicknamed fallbots, were designed for stealth, not stability, and each carried two heavily laden operatives with waterproof intelligence containers strapped beneath their knees. The wider context of this mission reflects the sensitivity of the Allied approach to the Balkans. By late 1942, British SOE units were already supporting communist-led partisan forces, but Washington had only recently begun considering direct involvement. The OSS wanted independent intelligence, information unfiltered through British channels. A memorandum from OSS Station Cairo, dated November 12, 1942, states, "Confirmation of German fortification series Alpha 7 essential. Local assets unreliable." This operation, though small in personnel, was large in geopolitical weight. It was the Americans' test case for future Balkan operations. After slipping from a British submarine several miles offshore, the fallbots advanced slowly under the cover of heavy fog. According to a later OSS instructor who reviewed debrief materials, the team paddled nearly blind, using only the sound of surf bouncing off cliffs to estimate their position. Hours later, scraping noises indicated they had reached the submerged limestone shelves characteristic of the Dalmatian coast. They landed without exchanging a word. The rocky terrain forced them to pull the fallbots high onto the shore, their hands shaking from cold, the salt water soaking their wool uniforms. In silence, the team split and began ascending goat paths toward what they believed was an unoccupied ridge. But the fog concealed more than their movements. German patrols, likely from the 114th Jaeger Division or the Feldgendarmerie, were conducting irregular sweeps after reported partisan sabotage in the area. The OSS men, unfamiliar with the terrain and expecting only light enemy presence, were forced to scatter into thickets of low, thorny maquis scrub. The only surviving account comes from a partisan fighter interviewed years later. "We heard shots. Not a battle, just sharp cracks. Then silence. The Americans moved like shadows but were not prepared for how close the Germans had come." The team eventually regrouped with the help of a small partisan cell led by a young liaison known only as Mara, a woman in her early 20s who had been guiding Allied contacts through the region. She later told British SOE officers that the Americans seemed frustrated and alarmed by the number of German field telephones discovered near the ridge, far more than intelligence estimates had predicted. The presence of multiple wire lines suggested either a new command post or an early warning system protecting coastal supply routes. If true, it would have represented a significant tactical shift by the Germans. But exfiltration proved far more dangerous than entry. A German patrol had discovered one of the hidden fallbots, dragging it onto the rocks and leaving it visible from the cliffs above. The OSS men, realizing their position was compromised, attempted a secondary extraction point several kilometers south. Just before dawn, under the fading protection of fog, the team split, half moving with the partisans, half attempting to reach the alternate cove. Only 3 men made it back to the submarine. The fate of the fourth operative, an American with extensive linguistic training known in documents only by his first initial, R, remains one of the most perplexing wartime disappearances associated with the OSS maritime unit. Some partisan accounts suggest he became separated during an evasion maneuver. A German field report discovered after the war mentions unidentified foreign equipment but makes no reference to prisoners. And a fragment of an OSS cable from Algiers simply states, "Are unable to locate. Assume lost in exfiltration." The unresolved nature of his disappearance casts a long shadow over the entire operation. Did he fall, captured silently by German scouts? Did he attempt a solitary escape, hoping to signal the submarine from another point? Or was he sheltered by local resistance fighters, his fate swallowed by the opacity of Balkan wartime chaos? Even today, researchers struggle to trace the truth. The Adriatic, with its shifting politics and deep wartime scars, keeps its secrets well. And as Allied covert operations intensified in the region, the answers surrounding MU Delta grew more distant. A missing man, a compromised landing, and intelligence fragments that never made it into official history. The next clandestine landing on the island of Leros in 1943 would only deepen the pattern of secrecy and silence surrounding these forbidden wartime missions. In the spring of 1943, with the Mediterranean still uncertain and the Aegean even more so, a small and rarely acknowledged British Special Boat Section mission unfolded on the Greek island of Leros. Officially, no reconnaissance landings occurred there before the planning stage of the Dodecanese campaign in late summer. Yet surviving fragments of SBS signal logs and a pair of heavily redacted War Office notations tell a different story, one in which a four-man team slipped ashore months earlier to investigate German activity that did not fit established intelligence patterns. Their landing, executed in silence and abandoned in secrecy, would later raise questions historians still debate. What exactly did the SBS see on Leros before the island became a battleground? The operation began under increasingly difficult circumstances. In early April 1943, the Aegean was effectively under Axis control, patrolled by German and Italian units that monitored sea lanes with aggressive vigilance. British submarines operating out of Alexandria were stretched thin, their patrol routes dictated by ultra-decrypts and naval priorities. Still, the newly formed Middle East SBS detachment insisted that unexplained German engineering movements on the Dodecanese Islands required direct confirmation. Photos from RAF reconnaissance sorties showed small clusters of construction materials stacked near coastal inlets, not alarming on their own, but their pattern suggested a coordinated effort. It was enough for combined operations in Cairo to authorize a limited reconnaissance, despite concerns that the Germans might detect an Allied presence. The struggle for the SBS team began before they reached Leros. Their insertion craft, a modified motor launch, endured rough seas that forced them several miles off course. Under cover of darkness, they deployed two two-man full-boats, as silent and vulnerable as those used by the OSS in the Adriatic, and paddled toward a narrow beach near Marikia Bay. They had no support beyond a single radio set, no expectation of local help, and orders to avoid contact with the island's Italian garrison entirely. Italy, although still officially Germany's ally, was regarded as unreliable. Trusting any Italian unit on Leros with sensitive intelligence could compromise the entire mission. As they landed, the team moved quickly into the broken terrain, navigating through olive groves and steep ridgelines that overlooked the bay. Leros was a fortress island by design. Its natural inlets made ideal harbors, and its high ground allowed observation across miles of sea. But what the SBS found during their night approach did not align with the expected Italian-controlled installations. They discovered fresh defensive trenches, neatly cut, precisely measured, and positioned farther inland than any known Italian pattern. The spacing suggested German engineering doctrine. Near a half-finished bunker, one commando noted the presence of recently delivered concrete bags stamped Marinebaugh, German naval construction material. Yet official British intelligence summaries for April 1943 claimed no German troops had been stationed on Leros at that time. Contextual clues confirmed the discrepancy. A War Office minute from April 22, 1943, references unverified activity by German survey detachments in the Central Aegean, but the wording stops short of naming islands. Another note, unsigned, states, field reports indicate preparatory measures for an expanded early warning chain. If the SBS team had indeed seen components of what would later become a German radar or anti-air coordination site, it would have represented a significant escalation, months before Allied intelligence predicted such development. As the team moved inland, they encountered something more troubling. A series of wooden crates, sealed and strapped in ways the Italians rarely used. Inside were metal components resembling antenna fittings and electrical couplers. Though the SBS commandos were not radar experts, one recognized markings consistent with German Würzburg or Freya system parts. Their presence on Luros so early in 1943 defied every known intelligence estimate. The reveal of this unexpected buildup was overshadowed by what happened next. As the team attempted to withdraw toward their extraction point, they intercepted faint German voices near a ridge leading to the coast. These were not Italian troops speaking German phrases. They were clearly native German speakers discussing Überstellung, transfer operations. The SBS men froze in place, realizing they had stumbled directly into a German forward party. Whether these were engineers, signal specialists, or advanced security detachments remains unknown. But their presence confirmed that German forces were expanding onto Luros months before official recognition. The team retreated silently, but radio interference prevented them from signaling the motor launch for timely extraction. With dawn approaching, they hid in a shallow ravine and attempted to re-establish contact. When communication finally succeeded, the launch commander warned of unexpected Axis patrol boat movements offshore. Extraction would require a risky shoreline sprint, timed precisely with the patrol's turning patterns. 3 men made it back to the foalboats. The fourth, a veteran sergeant, was last seen covering the group's withdrawal from a narrow cliff path. No gunshots were heard. No equipment was recovered. After the war, the Germans denied taking prisoners on Luros during this period, and Italian records list no captures. The sergeant simply vanished into the island's rough interior. Modern researchers examining the fragments of this mission face a series of unanswered questions. Why were German engineers present so early? What radar components were being moved into place? And what became of the missing sergeant, whose name was omitted from the few surviving documents? The silence surrounding the Luros landing mirrors a larger pattern emerging across these clandestine operations. Missions executed in haste, buried in secrecy, and remembered only through partial records. As the Allies prepared for major operations in Italy later that year, another covert insertion, this time near Anzio, would follow the same shadowed path. By late 1943, as the Allies prepared to strike at the Italian mainland with a force meant to break the German defensive line, a small and nearly invisible operation unfolded along the coast south of Anzio, one that never appeared in the planning papers for Operation Shingle. Its purpose was simple in intent but immense in consequence. Determine if German troop concentrations were shifting toward the coast and whether the enemy suspected an Allied landing in the region. The mission was assigned to a joint UK-US Commando element, a hybrid team drawn from the British Special Operations Executive and the U.S. Office of Strategic Services. It was an unlikely pairing born not from doctrine but from urgency. And like the previous covert landings, it would vanish into the margins of wartime records, referenced only in fragments: preliminary incursion, shoreline irregularity, and once, ominously, extraction compromised. The hook of the mission is found in a little-known fact. During the weeks before the Anzio landings, ultra-decrypts revealed a rise in encrypted German field transmissions along the southern Lazio coastline. The Wehrmacht never concentrated forces there. Official estimates showed only small security detachments, but the tone of their messages suggested increased vigilance. It was enough for Allied planners to send in a reconnaissance team with orders to verify German deployments and assess whether early warning positions had been reinforced. If the Germans anticipated an amphibious assault, Shingle's entire success would be in jeopardy. The struggle began almost as soon as the team landed. Their infiltration craft, a modified PT boat stripped of identifiable markings, released 2 small raiding craft under cover of moonless skies. As the commandos approached the shoreline, they encountered something unexpected: a recently installed belt of anti-landing mines placed well beyond the positions shown on reconnaissance photographs. The mines forced the team to shift several hundred meters south, where they waded through frigid surf and crossed a stretch of coarse sand before reaching the cover of coastal dunes. Each step had to be tested. German S-mines were often hidden shallow, triggered by pressure or tripwires that blended into the vegetation. Context for the mission reveals why everything felt so precarious. The German 715th Infantry Division, nominally responsible for the sector, had recently received reinforcements from the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. The timing was peculiar. These troops were not in standard defensive positions and had not yet appeared in formal intelligence summaries. A combined Chiefs of Staff memo dated December 22, 1943, notes, enemy activity in southern Lazio inconsistent with prior surveillance. Further ground-level verification recommended. That verification was precisely what the joint SOE-OSS team had been sent to obtain. Moving inland along a narrow path bordered by low shrubs, the commandos discovered signs of rapid German reorganization. Fresh tire tracks, likely from Kubelwagens, cut across the soil. Newly strung telephone wires connected a disguised observation bunker to a secondary communications node further inland. The team's American signals specialist, known only by his cover name Walker, tapped briefly into one of the lines using portable induction gear. He recorded a fragment of a message referencing Gruppe Blau, an internal designation not appearing in Allied intelligence at the time. Whatever Gruppe Blau was, the Germans seemed to be coordinating troop shifts more significant than anticipated. But the most striking find came when the team reached an abandoned farmhouse used as a temporary German forward post. Inside, they retrieved an encrypted notebook, left behind in haste, and several field maps marked with a series of blue circles positioned along the coastline. The circles corresponded to likely beach landing corridors. It appeared the Germans anticipated an amphibious landing somewhere in the region, though not yet at Anzio specifically. A diary entry found in the same building written by a German NCO read, "Rumors from headquarters, movement near the coast expected. Orders unclear." The ambiguity was both reassuring and unsettling. The Germans sensed something, but they did not yet know what. The reveal came during exfiltration. As the team retraced their steps toward the shoreline, they encountered faint German voices, closer than expected. A patrol unit, likely from the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, was moving along the same dune line the commandos had used hours earlier. The tension that followed was unbearable. The commandos flattened themselves against the sand, barely breathing as the Germans paused within meters of their position. One commando later wrote that he could hear the click of a lighter as a soldier attempted to shield a flame from the wind. When the danger passed, the team moved quickly, only to realize their extraction point had been compromised. A German patrol boat, its silhouette visible against the faint starlight, was sweeping the area. The PT boat offshore signaled once, an agreed-upon emergency code, before disappearing into the darkness to avoid detection. The commandos had no choice but to move south in hopes of reaching a secondary extraction zone. 2 men did not make it. Their final confirmed sighting was near a small ravine leading toward the alternate pickup point. A burst of German gunfire echoed shortly afterward, but no German reports mentioned captured commandos. Their disappearance remains an unresolved thread in OSS and SOE archives. The application of their findings would shape the urgency of Shingles preparations. Allied commanders increased camouflage measures, altered radio deception routines, and advanced the timetable for some naval movements based on the intelligence retrieved that night. But the close leaves a lingering sense of what was lost. The missing commandos, the compromised shoreline, and the coded German references to Gruppe Blau suggest deeper layers of enemy preparation, layers still debated by historians. And as spring approached, another forbidden landing, this time in the tense hours before D-Day in Normandy, would continue the pattern of covert operations shrouded in silence and uncertainty. In the tense early days of June 1944, with the English Channel swelling with ships and Allied planners locked in the final countdown to D-Day, one of the most secretive commando landings of the entire Normandy campaign unfolded under absolute silence. It was a mission never intended to be recorded, involving a small detachment of Royal Marine Commandos operating outside the framework of any officially acknowledged reconnaissance program. Their objective was simple in theory but perilous in execution: confirm whether German coastal batteries had shifted position in the hours before Operation Neptune, the largest amphibious assault in history, was set to begin. Their mission, conducted on a heavily patrolled shoreline under the shadow of imminent invasion, would test the limits of stealth, nerve, and endurance. A little-known fact anchors this mission. In the 72 hours before D-Day, German commanders issued rapid, decentralized orders to reposition several anti-ship guns along the Normandy coastline. Unlike earlier, carefully documented defensive adjustments, these last-minute changes were poorly recorded, leaving Allied intelligence to scrape together incomplete reports from aerial reconnaissance, local informants, and ultra-decrypts. But bad weather had grounded reconnaissance flights, and ultra-signals hinted only vaguely at overnight adjustments near several suspected strongpoints. With time running out, Admiral Bertram Ramsay authorized an emergency shoreline verification, one small team dispatched to look with their own eyes. The struggle began before they ever came within reach of France. The commandos departed from a converted gunboat disguised as a routine coastal escort vessel. At its stern, behind canvas screens, a small craft, a Mk2 assault boat, waited for deployment. The seas were choppy, with wind gusts threatening to tip the lightweight boat. The Royal Marines chosen for the mission included veterans from previous reconnaissance raids, among them a corporal from 47 Commando with experience in Norway and a French-speaking sergeant attached from 10 Inter-Allied Commando. Each man carried minimal gear: Fairbairn Sykes knives, suppressed Sten guns, waterproof notebooks, and small demolition charges meant only for emergency denial of equipment. The wider context reveals why this mission mattered. German strongpoints along the Normandy coast, labeled Widerstandsnester or resistance nests, were interconnected through a web of telephone lines and overlapping fire sectors. A single battery repositioned a few hundred meters inland could not only escape bombardment but also rain deadly fire onto landing craft. Air photos from June 4 showed camouflage nets shifted slightly, a detail uncertain enough to spark anxiety at SAEF headquarters. One intelligence officer wrote in a memo, "High probability of recent German adjustment. Cannot confirm. Recommend reconnaissance element if feasible." The feasibility was questionable, but the necessity outweighed the risks. Landing near a quiet stretch west of Wistrium, the Commandos slipped ashore just past midnight on June 5. The tide was low, exposing slick mudflats and jagged stakes hammered into the seabed, part of Rommel's beach obstacles designed to tear open landing craft. Moving carefully between them, the team reached a cluster of sand dunes beyond the surf line, laying flat as a German sentry's flashlight cut across the beach. They waited, barely breathing, until the light moved on. From there, the Commandos advanced inland toward a suspected battery site marked on their intelligence map. What they found confirmed the Allies' worst suspicions. The Germans had recently relocated at least one 75mm gun. Fresh tire tracks and drag marks led from a field emplacement toward a new firing position further east, partially concealed behind apple orchards. The earth around the new emplacement was freshly turned, and the smell of cut timber suggested work done only hours before. A corporal sketched the position quickly, marking the angle of fire and the approximate arc toward the sea. The reveal came when the team discovered signs of a more coordinated shift than anyone had predicted. German soldiers had erected a new communications mast beside a hedgerow, and telephone lines ran toward a cluster of camouflage trenches. The rapid repositioning suggested the Germans anticipated increased naval bombardment or a shift in Allied landing points. A fragment of overheard radio chatter caught by the French-speaking sergeant hinted at Verstärkung and Linkerflügel, reinforcements to the left flank. This was alarming. The Commandos realized the Germans were not blindsided. They were adjusting in real time. While attempting to withdraw, the team encountered an unexpected German patrol. The moon slipped from behind the clouds at the worst possible moment, illuminating the dunes where the Commandos crouched. A brief exchange of fire erupted, silent weapons against Mausers. The Germans, confused by the suppressed shots, took cover, giving the Commandos a narrow window to escape. Sprinting across the dunes, they scattered to avoid presenting a single target. The extraction rapidly devolved into chaos. By the time the Commandos reached the shoreline, a German patrol boat, likely an S-boot, had begun sweeping the coastline. The gunboat offshore could not risk approaching. Following emergency protocol, the Commandos moved south toward a secondary extraction site. But only one of the men, exhausted, drenched, and shaken, made it to the rendezvous point. The others vanished somewhere in the darkness between the dunes and the sea. No German reports list captured British Commandos that night. No bodies were recovered. Their disappearance remains one of the most enigmatic episodes linked to pre-D-Day reconnaissance. Yet the intelligence brought back by the lone survivor influenced the final-hour adjustments to naval bombardment plans. Coastal guns thought to be fixed targets were blasted more aggressively, and new artillery arcs predicted from the sketches were incorporated into the opening salvos. But the unanswered fate of the missing Commandos casts a shadow over the mission. Their last recorded movements, racing through the dunes as German forces closed in, hint at how close D-Day came to catastrophe. And as the war pushed toward its final phase, one last covert landing on the Norwegian coast in 1945 would continue the chain of secrecy and unresolved questions. In the final winter of the war, when Germany's defeat seemed inevitable but its capacity for surprise remained dangerous, a covert Allied landing unfolded along the icy Norwegian coastline, an operation so obscure that even post-war intelligence chiefs debated whether it had formally existed. Its purpose was urgent: verify rumors that German naval engineers were preparing a last-ditch convoy of U-boats intended to flee north into Arctic waters, potentially carrying advanced technology, intelligence materials, or high-ranking officials. The OSS and Britain's Special Operations Executive, recognizing the stakes, authorized a joint insertion under conditions that bordered on impossible. Official documents refer to it only as Nordlicht Reconnaissance, with most details redacted beyond recognition. The mission began with a chilling discovery. Intercepted German naval communications suggested unusual activity at several fjordside repair yards, movement inconsistent with routine winter maintenance. References to emergency retrofitting, polar assembly, and final provisioning raised alarms. One decrypted message from the Kriegsmarine hinted at a convoy nach Mitternacht, a convoy to the midnight seas. If accurate, the operation could complicate Allied efforts to secure German military archives and prevent the dispersal of sensitive assets. The Admiralty requested visual confirmation. Aerial reconnaissance was impossible due to relentless storms that cloaked Norway's coast in snow and ice. The struggle faced by the OSS SOE team was immense. Under the guidance of a Royal Navy trawler disguised as a Norwegian fishing vessel, 4 operatives boarded a collapsible, ice-reinforced dinghy hours before dawn. The trawler maintained a slow, natural drift to avoid detection by German coastal radars, which had grown increasingly sophisticated. Aboard the dinghy were 2 British operatives experienced in Arctic sabotage missions and 2 Americans from the OSS Special Counterintelligence Branch, trained in identifying naval signals equipment. Each man carried a well-rod pistol, microfilm supplies, and compact camera gear insulated against freezing temperatures. Norway in early 1945 was a fortress within a fortress. Tens of thousands of German troops occupied the country, supported by naval security detachments, Luftwaffe radar crews, and the feared Marine artillery units guarding fjord installations. Civilians were caught in a tightening vice. Rationing worsened, resistance groups were strained, and German patrols grew harsher as discipline within the ranks began to fray. The operatives knew that being caught meant certain execution. Landing beneath a steep rock face near the entrance to the Trondheimsfjord, the team moved inland with crampons strapped to their boots, clinging to ice-slick ledges while the wind howled through the narrow pass. They carried no radios. Wireless traffic risked triangulation. Their only reassurance came from the rhythmic crash of distant waves and the faint glow of German floodlights marking a repair dock ahead. The insight that followed was startling. From a vantage point overlooking the dockyard, the operatives spotted a cluster of engineers installing unfamiliar electrical housings along the hull of a Type 7 U-boat. Unlike standard fittings, these housings resembled reinforced conduits designed for extreme latitude operation. Even more troubling, crates bearing the markings of the Kriegsmarine Signals Intelligence Branch, B-Dienst, were being loaded onto another vessel. The implication was clear. Germany was preparing at least one, possibly several, U-boats for a long-range escape, potentially toward neutral or remote territories beyond Allied reach. A diary excerpt discovered after the war, written by a Norwegian mechanic conscripted into service, supports the team's observations. They work day and night on the boats. New wiring, new batteries. Something is wrong, everyone whispers of a flight. His testimony, though written months later, aligns closely with what the operatives witnessed that night. As they advanced to a secondary vantage point, the team encountered a German security patrol unexpected at that hour. Forced to freeze against a snowbank, they listened as the patrol discussed a breeze vor der capitulation, departure before capitulation. The words carried the heavy tone of officers aware the war was lost but determined to escape its consequences. Moments later, the patrol moved on, leaving the team shaken but undetected. The reveal came when the operatives spotted a partially hidden pen carved into the rock. Inside, a larger Type 9 U-boat rested beneath canvas awnings to conceal its silhouette from the air. Several officers boarded it carrying large metal containers, too heavy for documents alone, possibly holding prototype equipment or decoding systems. The team's American camera specialist captured a series of photographs through snow and darkness, carefully shielding his lens from the wind. These photographs, later recovered from OSS archives, were stamped "Eyes Only, No Copy," suggesting their unexpected importance. Exfiltration, as in so many of these clandestine landings, turned chaotic. As the operatives moved back toward the shoreline, the weather deteriorated rapidly. Sheets of sleet reduced visibility to a few meters. Near the extraction point, the team discovered footprints not their own, evidence that a German patrol boat had dropped a security team nearby. The trawler offshore flashed its recall signal, but reaching it required crossing an exposed patch of frozen shoreline. 3 men made it to the dinghy. The 4th, a British operative with years of experience in the Arctic, was last seen slipping behind an outcrop to observe the movements of the German patrol. A sharp crack echoed through the fjord moments later, perhaps ice shifting, perhaps gunfire. The others waited as long as they dared, but the trawler signaled an urgent withdrawal. No German records mention the capture of a commando that night, nor do any Allied reports record further sightings. The fate of the missing operative remains unknown. The intelligence brought back by the team accelerated Allied efforts to secure German naval facilities before the war's end. When British forces arrived in Norway weeks later, they discovered partially scuttled U-boats and abandoned crates matching those photographed during the mission, confirmation that the escape plan had been real. Yet the silence surrounding this landing endures. Its documents remain heavily redacted, and the final page of the mission brief, detailing last-minute intercepts, has never resurfaced. With this final forbidden landing, the pattern that spans the war becomes clear. Covert operations pushed to the limits of plausibility, carried out in darkness, and remembered only through fragments, each one revealing how much of World War II occurred far beyond the official record.